Hey Bullets YouTube channel.
Hurry up, now tell us why you're here.
Unfortunately, Rex Reveler was involved in a practice crash and will now have to miss the next 3 races. And starting at pole position is Bobby Swift with Clint Bocart to his outside. Row 2 has Kurt Buschtire, please don't say that word! And Juan Pablo Montoya to his outside. Row 3 has the jumper Jeff Burnton and Dale Earnhardt Jr. to his outside. Row 4 has Cal Weathers and the Rocket Ryan Newcar to his outside. Row 5 has Jimmy Cables and Brick Yardley, who raced at the Brickyard, like most of the rest of the field. Row 6 has Brad Keselowski and Jamie McCarry to his outside. Row 7 has Ernie Gearson, what's he doing up here? And Kevin Harvick to his outside. Row 8 has Lightning McQueen somehow behind Ernie Gearson and Casey Corner to his outside. Row 9 has Denny Carlin and Martin Truex Jr. to his outside, who seems to have switched places with Mike Yankee Jr., who will start on the inside of Row 10 with Michael Cartrip to his outside. Row 11 has David Rudikar and Murray Clutchburn, who's made over 900 consecutive starts. Row 12 has Carl Edwards and Sam Carnish Jr. for some reason to his outside. Row 13 is Joey Logierno, who took the old number of Tony Gasswert. Row 14 has Matt Karzith and his teammate David Raycar, who's somehow ahead of Jack DePost in points. Row 15 is Darren Mudfoot in his second start this season and Mark Carton to his outside. Row 16 has a row that should be much further up the field, Jeff Gorvette and Kyle Buschtire. Row 17 has Reb Meeker and Greg Beeple, what's he doing back here? Row 18 has Todd Marcus and Chip Gearings, who should really start picking up results. Row 19 has TG Castlenut and David Gillicar, substituting Bobby Carboni yet again. Row 20 has Brick Hicks and Dirksen DeAugustino. I wonder what they're going to do this race. Row 21 has Dino Draftski, who's not a shift right, and Phil Tankson to his outside. And starting in 43rd is Jack DePost, who only narrowly beat Chad Motorgas, Matthew Fuel Wheel, and Ryan Thunderbolt Jr. to qualify for this race. Bobby Swift would lead for the first 2 turns of the race, but then he'd lose the lead to Kevin Harvick, who would lead the field into the second lap of the race, but unfortunately, Dino Draftski would be out on lap 2 because of an engine failure. Dale Earnhardt Jr. would take the lead after the restart and only lead for a little bit before Juan Pablo Montoya would take the lead from him. He'd lead until lap 5, where Casey Corner would take the lead from him. 100 feet later, Dale Earnhardt Jr. would retake the lead, leading the field into the 6th lap. But Jeff Burnton would take the lead later in the lap and lead all the way until lap 8, where his teammate Clint Bocart would take the lead from him. Only about 250 feet later, Brad Keselowski would take the lead, and he'd lead the field into lap 9. But Lightning McQueen would take the lead as usual, and he'd lead the field until lap 12, where Michael Cartrip would take the lead from him. 1 lap later, Michael Cartrip would lose the lead to Lightning McQueen, who would lead the field for 3 laps before Jeff Burnton would take the lead from him, leading for 12 laps, but unfortunately, Chip Gearings would be out because of an engine failure, of course. And Brad Keselowski would take the lead from Jeff Burnton. But on lap 30, Michael Cartrip would retake the lead, leading for 2 laps before Brad Keselowski would be back in the lead, leading for 4 laps before Clint Bocart would retake the lead. He'd lead until lap 39, where he'd lose the lead to Kevin Harvick, his teammate. He'd lead until lap 41, but Martin Truex Jr. would take the lead from him, leading for just 1 whole lap before Cal Weathers would take the lead from him, leading all the way until lap 48, but then Mark Carton would take the lead from him, leading until lap 49, where Denny Carlin would take the lead from him, leading until lap 51, but Mark Carton would be back in the lead, leading until lap 52, where Denny Carlin once again will be back in the lead, leading until lap 53, where Dale Earnhardt Jr. would retake the lead. He'd lead for almost 10 laps, but Jamie McCarry would take the lead before that could happen. Later in lap 62, Kevin Harvick would retake the lead, leading until lap 64, where Kyle Buschtire would take the lead from himself, leading for 2 laps before his older brother Kurt would take the lead from him, leading until lap 69, where David Rudikar would take the lead. He'd lead for about 200 feet before Kevin Karvik would be back in the lead for 5 laps before Kyle Bushtire would retake the lead, leading for 2 more laps before Cal Weathers would take the lead from Self, leading all the way until lap 79, where Casey Corner would take the lead once again, leading until lap 80, but Dale Earnhardt Jr. would pass him on the inside and lead all the way until lap 82. But Juan Pablo Montoya would be back in the lead for 2 more laps, but Martin Truex Jr. would take the lead from him, leading until lap 84, where Juan Pablo Montoya would retake the lead the very next lap, leading all the way until lap 91, where Dale Earnhardt Jr. would take the lead and lead 10 whole laps before Carl Edwards would take the lead from him, leading all the way until lap 103, where David Rudikar would somehow get back in the lead for 2 laps, but Kevin Karvik would take the lead off of pit cycles. And after pit cycles end, Juan Pablo Montoya is back in the lead, leading all the way until lap 108, where Lightning McQueen once again takes the lead, leading for 4 more laps before Dale Earnhardt Jr. would be back in the lead, leading until lap 113, where Clint Bowcar would take the lead for 2 more laps. The car that would take the lead next is David Rudikar, and he would lead for 3 laps before Jamie McCarry would be once again back in the lead, leading until lap 121, where Kevin Karvik would take the lead from him. On lap 123, when Kevin Karvik would lose the lead, Jamie McCarry would be right there to take it. And Jamie McCarry would keep the lead until lap 125, where Jeff Burton would take the lead from him, but he'd lose it to his teammate Clint Bowcar on lap 126. And across the start-finish line, Jeff Burton would retake the lead on lap 127, leading for another lap, but then Clint Bowcar once again would be back in the lead, leading all the way until lap 129, where Juan Pablo Montoya would pass him on the outside, leading until lap 132, where Jamie McCarry, his teammate, would take the lead from him. But unfortunately, on lap 133, Kyle Bushtire would be 17th as of that lap, when he wrecks Jeff Burton and Todd Marcus. Why? Clint Bowcar would take the lead after the restart and lead for another lap before, of course, Lightning McQueen retakes the lead, leading for another 2 laps before Juan Pablo Montoya would be back in the lead, leading until lap 138, where Lightning McQueen would be right there to retake the lead. But on lap 139, the next lap, Joey Logierno would take the lead, and he'd lead for about 300 feet before Lightning McQueen is back in the lead, leading all the way until lap 150, where Martin Truex Jr. would take the lead and lead for 5 laps before Denny Carlin would take the lead from him, and he'd lead for 5 laps before Kyle Bushtire, his teammate, would retake the lead and lead for 16 laps before Jeff Gorvette would take the lead from Self, leading for just 2. But then Lightning McQueen, his old friend, would retake the lead, leading until lap 179, where Clint Bowcar would take the lead from him, leading for 8 laps before Kevin Karvik, his teammate, would be back in the lead, leading all the way until lap 188. Clint Bowcar would then retake the lead later in lap 188, but then he'd lose the lead on lap 195 to Lightning McQueen, who would lead the field into lap 200 before Kyle Bushtire would be 8th as of lap 200. Why, UX Dale Earnhardt Jr. Why? Bobby Swift would take the lead after the restart, leading on lap 201, but 300 feet later, Lightning McQueen would retake the lead, leading for 5 more laps before Cal Weathers would take the lead from him, leading for 3 laps before Clint Bowcar would be back in the lead, leading until lap 215, where Lightning McQueen, of course, retakes the lead, leading until lap 218, where Brick Yardley would somehow pass him on the outside, and unfortunately he'd be in the lead when David Rudikar would be out as a result of a cut tire. Lightning McQueen would take the lead after the restart and lead all the way until lap 229, where Cal Weathers would take the lead. He'd keep the lead until lap 237, where Clint Bowcar would take the lead from Self, leading for 3 laps before, of course, Lightning McQueen retakes the lead. He'd lead until lap 246, where Mike Yankee Jr. would take the lead. He'd keep the lead for about 70 feet before Mark Carton would take the lead from him. He'd lead for 2 whole laps before Cal Weathers would take the lead from him. He'd lead until lap 251, where Clint Bokar would once again retake the lead, leading for 5 laps before his teammate Kevin Karvik would be back in the lead. He'd lead until lap 261, where Juan Pablo Montoya would retake the lead, leading for 4 laps before Cal Weathers would retake the lead, leading all the way until lap 271, where Lightning McQueen, of course, retakes the lead, and he leads for 8 laps before Clint Bokar would take the lead from him. He'd lead the field until lap 304 before Lightning McQueen would be back in the lead, until lap 323, where Joey Logierno would take the lead from him, and he'd lead for 3 laps before Kevin Karvik would pass him on the outside, and he'd lead until lap 329, where his teammate Clint Bokar would take the lead from him, leading until lap 335, where Brick Yardley would once again retake the lead, leading until lap 338, where Darren Leadfoot would take the lead for the first time this race, and lead for 10 laps before Lightning McQueen is back in the lead, leading until lap 352, where Darren Leadfoot would once again be back in the lead, leading all the way until lap 366. Cal Weathers would take the lead from Darren Leadfoot and lead for another 11 laps before Kevin Karvik would retake the lead, leading until lap 384, where Lightning McQueen would take the lead from him, and somehow conspire to lose the lead very soon after taking it to Clint Bokar, who would lead for 5 laps before Reb Meeker would take the lead off of pit cycles. But after pit cycles are done, Lightning McQueen retakes the lead, leading all the way until lap 395, where Darren Leadfoot would take the lead from him, leading for 17 laps before Martin Karks Jr. would take the lead from Darren Leadfoot. But Lightning McQueen would be back in the lead on lap 417 and lead until lap 421, where Cal Weathers would retake the lead, leading all the way until lap 444, where Kyle Bushtire would take the lead, and he'd lead for 5 laps before Clint Bokar would take the lead from him, leading all the way until lap 472, where Lightning McQueen would take the lead on lap 473. But later on lap 489, Clint Bokar would take the lead. But on lap 496, Lightning McQueen would take the lead and lead the field into the white flag. Right before Lightning McQueen took the white flag, Kyle Bushtire would be 25th as of lap 499. Rex, Dirksen D'Agostino, Jamie McCarry, Brick Hicks, and Bobby Swift. And also wrecking David Gillicar and Reb Meeker. Why? Lightning McQueen would win the race, winning the 2010 Calladega 500, with Clint Bokar finishing second this race, Kevin Karvik third, Juan Pablo Montoya fourth, and Cal Weathers rounding out the top 5. And Brick Yardley unfortunately misses out on a top 5 finish, alongside Joey Logierno, Martin Karks Jr., Jeff Gorvette, and Denny Carlin rounding out the top 10. And somehow, Jimmy Cables and Tony Gasworth, who didn't finish in the top 20, did not lead a single lap. Well, neither did Matt Karzith, but he never leads any laps. He only led 1 lap all season. And Darren Leadfoot would finish a respectable 14th. And here is the rest of the field with David Raycar and Ernie Gearson missing out on a top 20 finish. Kyle Bushtire somehow conspires to finish in 25th. And about Tony Gasworth, he is the last car to finish on the lead lap, finishing 31st this race. And Kurt Bushtire is the car immediately ahead of him. How? And here is the top 20 in points, where Lightning McQueen leads by a margin of almost 600 points. And Martin Karks Jr. is somehow in the top 20 in points. Somehow, only barely ahead of Jamie McCarry.
Remember to press the notifications button, which goes ring, ring, ring after you press it. And lightning strikes back, and that's as if you subscribed, of course. And thank you for watching this entire video.
This race had a lot of lead changes. Just like the other race at Calladega this season, but not as many as the first Calladega race. Because remember, Matt Karzith led his only lap of the season over there. And somehow, Tony Gasworth did not lead a lap. And also, Lightning McQueen continues his trend of dominance. He is just under 600 points ahead of Kevin Karvik. It's not 600 points, but that's still a huge margin to lead by. And also, he's been number 1 in points the whole season. How can any car be this dominant? And the next race of the 2010 Piston Cup season will be coming out soon enough. Unfortunately, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine is still going on, and the Ukrainian people are tired of war and just want to live in peace and have freedom. But who stands in the way of this common dream? The tyrant and bully Vladimir Putin, who's bullying both Ukrainians by attacking their country and Russians by drafting them into a war that's none of their business. This war is the business of Vladimir Putin, and he made a huge mistake. And the Ukrainians are fighting back against the tyrant Vladimir Putin with the southern counteroffensive. Hopefully very soon, every single place in Ukraine, as shown on this map, will be liberated from Vladimir Putin. And we at the hashtag KBullets YouTube channel will continue to stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukrainie! Heroyam slava! Nechai shviche daruitsye! Ukrainie permoha! And coming up next, I will be waving the Ukrainian flag.